Thank you.
We're unmuted. We're gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is our City of Palatka Charter Review Committee Board meeting for February 24th. Roll call, please.
Jeremy Davis. Tom Dolan,
Present.
Joel Hill,
Carol Hill here.
Tracy Jackson. Elizabeth Kitchen.
Here.
James Norwood,
Present.
Tiffany Parker. Here. Matt Schuler. Audrey Wise,
Present.
Andy Svedek, like, him, never pronounce her name. He's doing it. Okay.
For the record, we have 6 members present. We have a quorum. At this time, everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes. January 13th and our January 21st special call meeting. Are there any exceptions or corrections to the minutes?
Second.
There's a motion to accept in a second. Is there any further discussion on readiness? Seeing that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries unanimously. Next up are reports from Putnam County Supervisor of Elections Polling Location Agreement. Council.
So this is a sample agreement, that the supervisor of elections shared, is it? Yes. I believe this was a request from one of the charter review committee members, to provide a copy of it, just for situational awareness of what the agreement looks like. This is an agreement for the supervisor of elections to use the space at the Price Martin Center for, as a polling place. So this is basically what it looks like, and the firms in red are eligible.
Any questions or concerns as it relates to the agreement that's there?
Is this signed annually?
I think it's been before Henry for years, if I'm not mistaken. But I could be, because it does look like it's on the annual.
This was for the 2024 election cycle. And because the dates are always changing, this would have to be updated every year.
But I do.
Just update it whenever there's an election.
Right. And Chair, I did receive that email from Matt Schuler on a unrelated item that he wanted me to share. I don't know at what point during today's meeting you want me to do that, or you just want me to forward it via email.
You can go ahead, you have the floor now, you can go ahead and that's fine.
It's conducting an unrelated research for Senate Bill 848, which proposes creating a publicly searchable online database for convicted felons. During our last CRC meeting, this type of database was discussed, or rather its non-existence, through the lens of city staff or other entities acting on the city's behalf, potentially using it for the purpose of conducting background checks on candidates applying for elected positions. There's still nothing in existence now, but just in case you weren't in this bill, I thought I'd share for your situational awareness. Feel invited to forward to my fellow committee members or include it in the next coming CRC agenda if you feel like this would be helpful. I can share that proposed Senate bill in the next meeting.
It's good information and it really ties right into what we got from the supervisor of elections. So any questions or comments as it relates to what we just heard? Thank you.
Question, regarding what he stated, and I looked that up too, and I thought it was an excellent idea. But as we see that the Board of Elections stated that's beyond what they are willing to do. So are we saying that we're going to have someone on staff that would do that for us? I just want to make sure I understand how that would work. If it was something we decided.
Timing.
Wait, we're just talking about your message. That's the CRC.
Regarding the pending Senate bill on the convicted felon database. Yeah, I shared your email just verbally to the group just now.
And let the record reflect, she answered.
I guess my question would be, is that a state database that they're talking about creating? And the city of likely have access to that database, through Kurt or whoever?
From what I was able to read within the bill, text, it looked like it was gonna be a publicly available, anybody, not just a government agency would be able to access it, but it wasn't gonna be available until I think 2037, I believe. It's gonna be way far off,
Okay,
but it's evidently something that's in the works.
it'll probably be available by the time we have the next job review.
Just maybe the second one.
Future CRC problem, not currently.
Wow.
37 means 47.
So my question is still, being that that is the case, is there something that's already in place for the city?
No,
Okay, that's my answer.
before you even ask that question.
Can I ask another question that somebody here may know the answer to? Currently, I guess convicted felons as certain convicted felons has to register.
Mhm.
Right? So what database do that information get input into? I know it's probably at the state level,
There's a sex offender registry
right?
that's on the state level, but also they register locally twice a year at a minimum, depending on whether they're predators or just offenders.
Yeah, but that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I think he was asking about felons just in general,
Yeah.
not just.
Well, not, in felons in general, but also if we want to break it down to where there's, molesters and that kind of thing, that's fine as well. But I think that if we are concerned about making sure that the proper background check is available, we need to understand where that information is located at, so that whoever is going to be in charge of gathering that information will have access to it.
Based on my knowledge right now, the Bureau of Executive Clemency is the only place that you can go to a registry, and you'd have to be, and on that registry, you have to input name and date of birth in order to pull up certain information, or Department of Corrections information. So if you've been convicted of a felony or you've been on probation or anything to that effect, you get what's called a DC number. People can put that in and check, and then they also get certificates if their rights are restored or if they gain clemency, and it articulates what's there. And they use that a lot, particularly when they're doing restoration of rights, the Amendment 4 type stuff. But that's the closest thing to a database that I know of, and Matt, you may know of something different.
FCIC is probably gonna be the closest thing that you're talking about. That's what I'm assuming we already use, is talking with West Virginia with the FBI to do a background check that way. But what you're talking about, that only deals with if there's an EO issue for the clemency, if the person's civil rights were restored.
Right.
As far as whether or not they have a any felony charges filed against them or adjudications of a felony charge. In general, there's no one database for that except for FCIC.
Chairman,
But your rights aren't gonna be taken unless you've been convicted of a felony.
you can do a Google search, and if there's any newspaper article on the person, that will show up, and there are private databases like Detective Plus and some other private search engines that will pull up the felony records. I have been in them before.
Okay.
But they specify you're not allowed to use those records as employment or anything like that. They just tell you about them.
Okay, my goal, I guess our goal is to make sure that we don't end up in a situation that one of our previous sister cities, ended up in.
Yeah.
It's going back to the conversation we had before, it's NCIC on the national level, which is gonna be the place that's gonna do it. And then the issue you have a lot of times, and so that I've seen from a work side, is you have places like New York, for example, they may charge a crime as a felony,
Mhm.
but by the time they do the disposition, it's a misdemeanor, which is, so there are some nuances to it, and it takes a little more research on that side, but that's a story for another day, but and the reality is, right now, we're doing nothing other than basically using the honor code as the mechanism until something happens, and then there becomes a problem like we've seen in other places. And then the question goes back again to whether we as an entity, as a committee, want to push that forward by way of charter or by ordinance to the city, and that's what it boils down to.
So, and I think when that actually happened, the question came up was whose responsibility was it to do the background checks, and why didn't they catch this and that kind of thing, this, that, and other. So in the charter review, if we're going to require background checks and that kind of thing, that responsibility has to belong to somebody. And I think that it behooves us to understand where that information is, where they would, to make sure that they will have access to that information. Where we don't start doing the blame game and that kind of thing as well.
Chairman?
Go
That is probably okay if you're doing like an employee, but when you're talking about somebody that's running as a political officer under a different set of laws, and you couldn't necessarily say political candidate John Doe or Mary Smith has a felony background, because that would become under a whole different set of rules and regulations concerning libel, slander, and election laws, a whole bunch of stuff. If you're talking employees only, that's a different thing in my book. So you have to, I say, don't put it in the charter, let it go the way it is. It'll get found sooner or later.
I guess my only thing is, I guess I would think the city has a responsibility to its citizens to ensure people are qualified to run for office.
Which goes back to it goes back to the charter.
Right.
And the charter says they have to have the same, the qualifications of electors. And so that's where you have that expansive language, and that's been a conversation that we've been having. Right.
Doesn't that go back to the state rules when it says that they have the qualifications of electors? Wouldn't that go back to the supervisor of election and the state rules and the federal laws?
But if you remember what you heard from Mr. Overturf and his,
Yeah, I read it.
the one comment that he said, I think that really stuck out with me, was when the question was asked as it pertained to the canvassing board, and if the city was to enact a policy which said to do additional steps for background, they said they would honor whatever we put in place. So it doesn't, so based upon what I'm interpreting from his answer, there wasn't anything that he identified at that time that would readily be violating the rights of any voter or candidate. And so if somebody else had a different interpretation, then definitely, we're welcome for the conversation on that, but it seemed as though that was his sentiment at that.
It was, absolutely, it was. And I think, because he alluded to them having responsibility via the contract that they would have with the different cities, because that falls under his auspices, to do whatever it is that we put in that contract for them to do when it comes to, individuals that are running for office.
But I don't think he wanted to allow background investigations as part of their scope.
He didn't say that. He said whatever we put in, whatever we asked him to do, said he would fulfill that.
Oh, I agree 100%. He did say that.
I thought he said that wasn't part of his scope though.
I didn't think he was gonna do the background investigations. I think he was
No.
going.
He's not gonna volunteer.
Yeah.
He's gonna let somebody do it.
Of course.
I don't think he can,
No, he can't.
by state law.
HR makes
Let me,
sense.
let me go here and then I'll come back to whoever else has something.
Okay, so, my kid is playing softball, and in order to be on the field with the softball kids, the state of Florida requires that you have a level 2 clearance, so you have to go down to city shippers, you have to have your
You pass.
fingerprints. Of course. You have to have your fingerprints checked, and you have to do this every 5 years. It's good for 5 years. Now, it is $100 fee, but I don't see why a candidate can't do that. And, then, but you don't have to announce to the public what made them disqualified. You can simply say they were not they didn't pass all of the qualifications in order to run. You don't have to say they're a convicted felon. And I know other clubs, the Masonic Lodge, for instance, you have to do a background check in order to become a Masonic member. And the secretary gets your background check immediately. It's a sealed envelope, all of the things. And then he says, you're not qualified or you are qualified. And then that background check is shredded. So there is no evidence of it. So there's no, so it can't get out into the public if something is awry or
A little different, a little different with government.
well, exactly, but I do feel like you don't have to announce, well, he's a convicted felon, so he can't run.
Well, and the other piece is when you apply to run for office and until you qualify, some people, once you sign up, then kind of supervisor elections officer put it out there, but you really don't have to put it out there until you're actually qualified to be on the ballot.
Right.
So it's a matter of how the information is released, and that's something that you can control through contract.
And you also have to sign an affidavit, basically saying that you're none of that. And then if you come out to be that way, then the law kicks in and gets you. And what you were referring to, the churches have the same thing. Whenever somebody works with the youth, or even a pastor, but it's not felon, it's sex offender. There's a difference. It's sex offender. So the question is, for the soccer and all that, is it all felons or just sex offenders?
You've got to pass it back.
Well, it's also about.
Perhaps we could get a law enforcement contribution to explain different levels of these clearances, level 1, level 2, level 3.
We can get Chief in. Chief does it, so we can get them in. We'll get someone from the PD to come in and do that.
Good.
If we can just put that on there for our Casper, our new business next time.
So, HR does do background checks on all employees. The commissioners are, of course, employees, but that wouldn't kick in until they were actually elected. I believe what you're talking about is while they're still candidates.
Everything, sure.
Yeah, if I can remember correctly from what Mr. Overturf was explaining to us, is that he collects all the documentation from the candidate and sends it off to the Department of State with the state level supervisor of elections, and then they do a background check that way. So there already is a background check put in place for candidates who apply to run for office. What we're trying to discuss is whether or not we want to do an additional level of background check, and is that actually necessary at this stage?
I don't think it is, and I know personally I don't. But that's up to the rest of y'all.
That's the case. Chair.
I think it's taken
If
too
that's the
far.
case, how in the name of God did that situation happen in the other city, if that's the case?
Because you still have places where you fall through the cracks. That's
Okay.
people who were,
So no matter what.
but you have folks who are out of state. So it may get caught on the Florida database
Mhm.
in some cases, and in other cases it won't. So even when you get appointed positions within, you have appointed positions within cities, you still follow some of the same parameters, and things fall through the cracks because of age, because of different things. And so it happens. It happens, and it's something that continues on. And so you've had people who've been in place for years, and finally somebody becomes a whistleblower, for lack of any other term. And all of a sudden, you see a person who's been in office for 8 years be removed because of background. And so that's where we are.
In the case of that particular person you're talking about, it happened in another state, and their rules were slightly different from Florida. Florida didn't know he had been convicted and then apparently unconvicted or whatever it was in the other state. But Florida says, once you're in trouble, that's a short version. And I guess somebody from the other state maybe contacted our sister city. I'm not sure exactly how they found out about it, but it had to do with another state's laws and the floor laws.
Sure. I keep bringing this up and I'm thinking now that I think we have some resolve now. So that we could actually just say, okay, we put this to bed. That's around background checks and whatnot. We're going to rely on the information that the supervisor of election gathers and sends to the proper authority for the background checks and that kind of thing as well. That way we don't get bogged down in our meetings again with this.
Let's put it
As far as the
together.
process
Right,
itself
yeah,
is what the process was,
right.
that he stated, that it goes to this point and that point. If we say that, like you were saying, with that, I mean, what else can we do until something develops that can be found that we can tap into that's not going to put us at jeopardy for anybody else?
So I'm gonna take that as a motion, Commissioner, and you're gonna restate it for us so that we can make sure we all have clear understanding.
Let me make sure that I can remember what I said.
It's
I keep bringing this up and we tend to, as far as get bogged down and to have in the discussion around background checks and whatnot. And the supervisor of election did come to us and tell us that he did send the information off to the state and he relies on them and relies on the information that he gets back from them to determine whether the individual is qualified. And I move that we align ourselves with what the supervisor of election actually does and accept the report that the state gives him back, whether a person is qualified or not.
I second it.
The motion on the floor in a second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Discussion, in the chair, I think exactly, I'm in for the motion and I'm all in, but I think if we say what that process is, like the name of the department or where it goes, and just name it and leave it, that's what I would say we need to say.
Florida State Supervisor. right?
Yes, whatever that is.
The Department of Elections.
Mhm. Mhm.
I concur.
So we've got a motion, we've got a motion on the floor and there's a second. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
Questions called, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Motion carries, vote of 5-1. 6-1. Okay, and that gives our segue right into our recap of elections, which we've really been doing at this point. Were there any other pieces that we had, looking at the committees that we had several subcommittees in place as it related to the elections pieces. Were there any other concerns or questions that we had as it relates to where we were, with the election pieces? Is there anything else as we look at our three subcommittees, the information that we've addressed, from residency to qualifications, to process and background? Has there been anything that you guys feel that we need to touch on in furtherance of where we are? Council, you have anything in particular?
Last year, I'm sure all of you remember like yesterday. I identified under the elections article 2 things for this committee to consider. One is require that the commissioners be registered voters who have resided in the city for at least 1 year before they run for office. And second, grounds for removal, such as ceasing to be a registered voter residing in the city, convicted of a misdemeanor involving moral turpitude or any felony, or absent for 4 consecutive regular city commission meetings, various criteria like that, that would be grounds for removal from office.
So the committee had the conversation as it relates to residency, and correct me if I'm wrong, the understanding was that we would stay status quo with the 6 months as the measuring rod for residency within the community. We had conversation about the other alternatives to that. And that was the piece, and I think that was part of the conversations with the supervisor of elections as it came down to how people actually register to vote inside the city. By whether they use business addresses or residential addresses or whatever it may be, and if there was any additional pieces as it related to homestead. being voting in your homestead, and we had that whole conversation about people on apartments versus homes and all those things. So we've addressed the length of time. Any other conversations that relates to length of residency? Something that we've gone over.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And it pertains to the current city manager search,
Right.
because the offer that's on the table came back with a counter offer of not living in the city and getting paid for it. And incrementally, 5,000 if he lives in Putnam, 10,000 if he lives, I forget the details of it, but
I agree with you without you even saying a word. That is so. And go ahead and finish your thought, but
well, how do
I'm with
we
you.
make candidates aware of the city charter, like? Because it's in direct violation of the city charter and state law to not reside in the city where you're at.
But he's an appointed position, and that's
Doesn't
the
apply.
difference.
Okay.
Because so if it was a city commissioner, and then you get into that other little nuance where, and our charters is the same thing. We talked about the state law as it relates to the electeds. The electeds must reside in the city that they are in leadership in.
Gotcha. All right.
But as an appointed official, so when you look at it, your appointed officials in the city are the city, the police chief, the fire chief, the clerk, the city manager, and the city attorney. And so there isn't a residency requirement on anyone other than the city manager at this time. Historically, there have been residency requirements on the others, and the requirements were changed through contract negotiations. And so you ended up with people who took appointments where I think Don Home may be the best example. Because he lived just outside of the city limits and he was a long-term employee who had history, that he was allowed to continue on and not move out of his home in order to do that. Mike Zimbor, who was a city manager at one time, he rented an apartment in Palatka and went back to his home on the weekends because he had family and kids there. And so, but his majority of residing, he was a resident of Palatka. His residency had to be changed to Palatka in order for him to take the job. And in other cases, it's been, right, Terry Suggs moved here from Keystone. And in other cases, you've had a relaxing over the years of that requirement in the same way. And I'll say for me, I wholeheartedly believe that if you reign in Palatka, you should reside in Palatka, and council is living in the city limits of Palatka. And so, you came from St. Johns County, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. And that's the thing, because and I heard the commission say, oh, there isn't adequate housing there. Well, how do we get to a point where there's adequate housing, or when we start letting all of our management folks not come to the city? If you make your money in Palatka, I will hope you spend your money in Palatka. And so that's where part of the issue comes in from the leadership side. I think when you look at Ms. Hayes, for example, it's different. She's coming from an entirely different city and she's just getting here. In a lot of cities, they say you have 1 year to change your residency. I was talking to prior council who said in Dade County, they had a hard and fast rule for everybody who worked in Dade County for years. If you worked in Dade County government, you had 1 year to change your residence to Dade County. They would do an audit, and if you didn't work in Dade County anymore. And so that was one of the things that happened, yes.
Starting in 08, when I was on the commission, the rules got lax. When Willie Boynton became the city manager,
Sure.
he already had a home on Highway 19, which was not in the city limits, and he had a mortgage, and it wasn't feasible for him to try to get rid of the home. He didn't have enough equity. So they let him slide, as they did Shanahan, Folston, Zimbor, to some degree. Zimbor rented an apartment. Bill never actually moved here, although he was renting an apartment. Terry Suggs did move here to the city. So there's been a long history, basically, of almost all of our city managers since 08 have not been required to live in the city. I also agree with former mayor. They should be required to live in the city. Give them a period of time, maybe 3 months to move in, but if they want to work in the city of Manchester, they need to live here. And I am totally confused about Mr. Edmund Jones with what I read in the paper. He said if he relocates into the city of Palatka, he has to be paid $15,000 relocation fee. If he relocates outside the city limits but has a Palatka post office box, the city has to pay him $10,000 to relocate. If he lives within 20 miles from the city, then they have to pay him $5,000. That's totally ridiculous. It should be the opposite.
It's 20 miles from the county.
Well, the paper misquoted it, but anyway, I think it's totally ridiculous when the commission already voted on giving $5,000 moving fee. However, that's neither here nor there, and that doesn't affect us other than citizens.
Through the chair, I think Mr. Dolan is asking, is there going to be teeth in our charter when it comes to certain things? I thoroughly understand someone being hired in the middle of the year and your children somewhere else, a year to switch residency. I get that, honestly, because I wouldn't want my children picked up and moved. Honestly, I get that, but I totally agree with you about residing in where you. So what can we do if our commission is willing to not go by what we're doing here? So I think that's what you were asking. Is there any teeth in this? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
Like,
Please.
it would be helpful, I think, if you gave the commissioners a tool.
Recommendation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they don't feel that they have to contractually negotiate it with every candidate that comes along the pike. If you have it in the charter, they can look to that and point to it and say, sorry, you have to do this. That's what our charter says. It gives them cover.
Through the chair, by saying that, I totally agree with that. And I think it should be reasonable for us to give someone a year, especially in the situation.
Is that your motion?
I make. Through the chair, I'd like to make a motion that we allow when it comes to contracting any type of agreement with any employee that comes into the city of Palatka.
Okay, we can't do that because of the unions.
Okay, let's say a year of relocation to be a resident of the city of Palatka.
Is that for appointed? Is that for appointed or elected? Well, electeds already have it.
For city manager. I
For
think.
city
manager.
I think we started low hanging fruit with the city manager. I think with the appointed, it's kind of a different conversation at this point.
I'm serious.
So city manager? So there's a motion on the floor for residential requirement for the city manager, just as the commission.
Within a year, correct?
With the one, with 1 year to become a permanent resident.
I'll second it.
There's a
Any
motion.
other question?
There's a second. Now we're into questions and discussion.
Usually they're on a 6-month probation. I don't know, that, if they give them a year to move in, I think that is, I'm thinking out loud, that's probably reasonable, because if they don't get hired within the 6 months, which the last one did, well, he did, then he got benefits and left, but, yeah, I think that's reasonable. I'll stand with my second.
So there's that piece. And then just to give a bit of history, I think when, Folkestone was here, he asked for an extension for moving, which was granted by the commission for his 6 months. And also historically, you had managers, you had like 3 managers in a row who lived literally in the same apartment in downtown.
Mhm.
And they rented that apartment and they stayed here during the weekdays and they left on the weekends. And that happened so that they could comply with the residence requirement. It was affectionately almost termed as the city manager apartment. Because literally you had 3 consecutive managers who were staying in the same apartment.
But then that defeats the purpose of them even staying here. They're not spending their weekends here. They're not spending their money here. They're not truly invested in the area. Now, I would not be opposed to considering maybe a 10-mile radius of, the city proper. So you're still within the county, you're still very close, you're still spending your majority of your time, your energy, and your money within the city limits for the most part. I mean, you're paying county taxes, but it does, I think our city is limited in housing availability, especially for larger families. I don't know. And I personally live on the river and I love living on the river and I think within the 10-mile radius. I mean, it just opens up and I spend every moment within the city limits that I'm not at my house.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree in theory with what Tiffany's saying, but I don't think that we can put legal restrictions on what someone can do on their off time when the city manager works generally from 8 to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. We can't say he has to be in the city on weekends. That would prevent him from going on vacation, going to visit family. I don't think we can monitor what he does in his off time, but we might want to say that he be available wherever he is, at least available by phone on his off hours.
What his contract says on
Okay,
call
okay.
24/7.
That's not what I meant.
I
I
know.
mean, invested in the area.
What I'll say is, what I'll say is that, it's very difficult. I think part of the commission's job and part of the manager's job is to try to make this be a place that people see as home. And I think it's very difficult to say, I want you to live in Palatka and pay taxes here and be a citizen of this community and be a part of the body politic and all these other things if you aren't. I think it's almost hypocritical to an extent, because if you're saying the housing stock isn't good, then are you willing to invest in build or take something and make it better? Are you, and I get that, you've got 40,000 people who live in 32177. But the reality of it is they don't live in the city limits of Palatka, and it's different. And I think until we get our middle managers and private sector and the school district and all these other areas, until we get people to come in here and see this as home, not as just a place that we come do our business and then go back somewhere else, then we're gonna continually have things that we have. 44% of your people don't pay taxes because their properties are valued below homestead rates. And so you have to get people who have resources, who want better housing, to look at infill as opportunities or to look at or annexation even.
Yeah, the city manager, we have a city manager form of government. He's listed in our charter as well, so what his responsibilities and that kind of thing is. We have the opportunity to put a resident requirement in here for the city manager. And I know you guys are talking about tax and that kind of thing, but as far as I'm concerned, he's the top manager that enforces laws and make sure law enforcement and the fire department, as well as the trash department, all functions the way they need to function and this, that, and other. He ought to be able to live under the laws that he's enforcing and our ordinances that the city government has given him to put in place to where it governs the city. He ought to live under that.
Audrey made that motion and we seconded it. We're just under discussion now.
Right.
And while we're doing that, I'll just say this as well. I think the police chief and the fire chief should be under the same conversation, but that's the next piece of the group. And,
But they don't come under the charter.
they do.
I mean, I guess I ain't got the point.
Well, they're under the city.
Also about them being appointed,
They're the charter the same way as everyone
but
else.
they spell out their.
Union rules though.
They are not union. The chief, no, the chief and the chiefs, the administrators are not union. They're non-union employees. It's below, I think it's below captain or lieutenant. That's all considered as order lieutenant. Their administration, if you're considered administration, you're not eligible for union.
Well, let's deal with the city manager and move on to the next thing right now,
Well,
I would say.
Commissioner Norwood, you're the one that brought this up. We were trying to wrap up the elections article, and that's how this conversation started. The other thing, and I'm just going off my.
Let's give the vote on this and then we'll come.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So we got a vote. We've kind of exhausted conversation at this point. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So let's go to the next piece.
The grounds for removal, this was just something for consideration, such as ceasing to be a registered voter, residing in the city, convicted of a misdemeanor involving moral turpitude or any felony. Absent from four regular city commission meetings, just those were some of the things that I had flagged under the topic of elections, if you wanna put this one to rest.
And that went back to the conversation that we had before about excessive absences.
That's what I was gonna answer that question.
And-
Excused absences or absences.
I think this is a great time. I think it's a great time to have council come back with some proposed language.
Chair, let me say this, and then I will relinquish to the council and coming back, bringing this language and that kind of thing, we're explaining. But I feel that individuals that are elected to the office should show up. And there is no such thing to me as an excused absence. You can be in the hospital, it's not an excused absence. And the reason being, the city's business still got to be taken care of. And we're depending on those individuals to give direction to staff. So with that being said, I don't go along with those excused absences and that kind of thing. It's real. Because then you're saying that you can delay the city business to a time uncertain.
Here, I'm going to Dolan and then come back to you, Ms. Wise. And just so you guys know, we're gonna be out of here about 10 minutes till, because they got a commission meeting.
5 minutes.
But we are where we need to be right now.
I thought we were a winner of this and voted on it.
I think the word that Ms. Wise used was reasonableness. And that's something that we need to make sure that we're doing, because there are times, excused or not, where you just can't make a freaking meeting. You're not gonna be able to make it there, your child's sick, something like that. So reasonableness, maybe we don't require 100% attendance, but put language in there that
If we look at, I think it's with some of the housing authority and even with some of the other boards that are out there, I think it's more than 2 consecutive unexcused absences was the standard.
Unexcused discipline.
Right,
Right.
that was the standard before. And that language was found in, I want to say in ordinance or something before.
Well,
What constitutes an excused absence?
I would probably use an example of me having COVID. I can say the things that I've experienced while I was on the commission, and I was in the hospital for 10 days, but luckily it was during the holidays, so I didn't miss. But, and then I had 2 parents die, and then I know other commissioners had spouses pass, so there are some, and parents, so I know those are some of the things I think that, meet those qualifications, and then you have people who are hospitalized in those meetings. So I think things that are beyond your control, or if you have, death or family emergency, it meets it. Where my concern comes in is where I think people use the ability to appear electronically as a convenience more so than a necessity, and it happens it started happening to the point where at least one commissioner was always on Zoom.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone else. And then there are other times, I think that we have to prioritize the things that we have. I understand we do things that have commitments with the Florida League of Cities and all that other stuff, but that stuff should not take precedence over what goes on with the city. And I think that in those situations, we continue, when we prioritize the business here, not the business somewhere else. And I think that's what the message, the sentiment has to be in the language.
I would think death, obviously, death in the
But
family.
you won't be here then.
Not death in the family, oh, of course, death, well, I don't know.
she'll start probably still be here.
I've seen some death talking, so that's beside the point. But death in the family emergency, like a surgery or a mother getting sick, some kind of a serious family emergency, death in the family. Illness, of course, or hospitalization, not vacations. You can schedule your vacations around the city commission. You can schedule your League of Cities around it. When you run for commission, you have an obligation to the citizens to put you in office. That's number one. If your family comes first, you better rethink it, because you do have an obligation to people to put you in office. So serious things, but not calling from a swimming pool in the Bahamas when you hear glasses tinkling and people singing in the background and trying to attend a city commission meeting. No attendance on Zoom. And excuse absences for emergency like death, illness, that type of thing.
I'm going to go around the room, Mr. Dolan, and then Norwood.
I just don't think we're in the business of setting up the examples.
Right.
Leave that up to the city manager, leave it up to the commission. That's We don't need to define it.
We have to, the only thing we need to do is. make
30,000
sure-
foot level.
Right, we need to make sure that people, that the culture is created by the commission and not necessarily by the words. And I think that's the difference in all of it, but I think the message has to be sent that visually there's an issue.
And I'm gonna make a statement, then I'm going to make a recommendation as well, is that when I was a commissioner here, I was an auditor at GP. I went around the country doing audits and that kind of thing. And I was required to be there for a week, wherever I was required to be there a week. But on nights that we had city commission meeting, I came home Thursday morning to make sure that I was at city commission meeting. But not only that, as well, whenever I was chair of several committees, in the league as well, we'd be in Tallahassee meeting, or we'd be meeting in Miami or whatever, I drove back to be here at the city commission meeting because that was my primary duty. That's what, the reason why I became a city commissioner. So with that being said, and with just listening to everybody, listening to everyone that's think that, well, we have to have some type of leniency and whatnot. I think the leniency should be, you should not miss more than 4 commission meetings a month. I mean, not a month, a year. A year. I mean, because if you miss more than 4 commission meetings, if you're not present at the diocese for 4 meetings, I mean, it's twice a month so it's around 20 meetings a year. If you're not present at the diocese for 16 of those, then I don't think that you qualify to be a city commissioner any longer, just because you are not giving the people an opportunity to bring and voice their concerns to you. Because normally at the city commission meetings is when those type of discussions actually take place.
The only other place I would say that it can become a bit hairy is if you have to have that emergency meeting at 9 AM and the person can't get off work. You know, that may be the only place, but I do agree, and I think that Mr. Dolan is right. We just I think it's incumbent upon us to send the message that attendance should be something that's taken seriously. And I mean, I also think, I think if you do anything, you limit the number of electronic appearances.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if that's something that we want to talk about. We've talked about it before, and it's kind of waking it back up, but we've got the motion on the floor.
Forgot what the motion was, Neil.
We just had a
I'll
conversation.
for the motion.
Oh, okay, no wonder.
But I think we have to send a message that it's something the commission needs to.
He can task me with coming back with some language, so what
That's my
I'll do is
suggestion.
provide maybe a menu of options for the next meeting, and you guys can go through and see what you want.
By general consensus, are we okay with?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so that's where we are. You got one more thing on there?
Nope.
Under that, so that covers everything that we have. So we're nearing the end of the charter and the things that we have to get in place. And once we go through those pieces, we're gonna come back. Did we get an understanding on whether we continue with the gas authorities piece and then also?
So when I was reviewing this, there's actually a lot of other things for you guys, unfortunately, that you need to consider. Things like propose an amendment to the charter that authorizes the formation of a charter review commission and how periodically you're going to meet. Like in St. Augustine Beach, for example, it's in the charter that they meet every 10 years. Did you want to have that so we don't have this issue again? Propose an amendment to the charter that authorizes a citizen initiative process where 10% of registered voters can put a referendum on the ballot. We don't have that option now. Is that something you want? I can copy this old memo so you guys can mull it over before the next meeting, if that would be helpful.
I was going to suggest have her bring all those suggestions back, put on the agenda for the next meeting along with the gas authorities.
Let's email, we've got the gas authority stuff here
Yeah.
to continue for our meeting. But let's, and the airport authorities stuff as well.
Yeah,
We-
it
and
was
so-
on.
So we've got those two things. That'll be the next pieces that we jump into. And then we will have the future, and under our new business piece, put in the considerations. The future considerations and send it, and maybe shoot us an email out with those pieces so that we can.
Good.
We have the mayor pro tem too.
And just so that and so this is something we need to do today. The other pieces, and so it was on the agenda, and I want to make sure that we address it today. Andy Davis, was on the committee with us. She was elected as commissioner. So we lost a person on the committee, which moves Annie Swetlick into membership as the alternate. My recommendation, I put on the agenda, was to have Commissioner Davis appoint her replacement and to make that recommendation to the commission to do so. And I want to bring it to the board to see if everyone was in agreement with that.
I like it.
I agree.
And so I'll entertain a motion at this time.
I make a motion that we allow, Commissioner Davis to appoint her, designee for this chapter
We make a recommendation to the commission.
to the commission to, appoint a new representative.
So there's a recommendation. So there's a motion to make a recommendation to the commission for Commissioner Davis, Henderson Davis, to appoint her replacement to this charter review committee.
We don't want to specify any.
To recommend to the commission.
Right, there's a recommendation,
Oh,
right. There's a recommendation.
For her to recommend to the commission.
Right, for her to recommend, is a recommendation for us to make the recommendation that Commissioner Henderson Davis be able to recommend her replacement.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. That's it.
If that's what already said, I'll second it.
My question on that is, if everybody gets that same opportunity, then that's fair, but
That's fine.
I don't understand why.
Well, the reason is because she was here on this committee. The reason I made the recommendation for her to do it is because she was on the committee. And she was on the committee and she's the only commissioner who hasn't had a recommendation, period, as it relates to what's in place. We're all here because of recommendations from commissioner staff.
But they all have to vote on it.
And because she's the newest commissioner and she's the person who was on this committee, who understands this committee more than anybody does at this point. She's the only one who sits up there on the dais now who's never recommended anybody.
But I think to your question, no, for example, if Tiffany were to step down, she would not be able to make a recommendation to the
Right, that
commission
would
on
be
her
the question.
replacement.
Yeah.
So based on that, I would.
She's doing it as commissioner, but let's say, who recommended you?
I have no idea.
So let's say, whatever commissioner recommended you, if you had to step down, then we would ask that commissioner to.
I applied also, I wasn't recommending.
So
Why don't we
that's
just,
the way we do
why
it.
don't we just ask the commission to recommend Annie?
Okay.
We
No,
recommend Annie.
we already, Annie comes in because she's alternate. Ms. Swetlick comes in because she's alternate,
It usually the alternate automatically goes into.
but you still need another person.
You need another alternate.
Yeah, we get another alternate.
So you don't technically need to replace because the way that it's written, this committee is up to 11 members. So you don't have to fill that position if you don't want.
We don't, but
That is a word about it.
my recommendation was so that we keep an odd number of people around. And we have that extra because we're, right now, we got 7 of us here.
We got a forum, don't we? A forum.
Yeah, today. So I don't want to get to a point where we're canceling meetings like other people have to cancel meetings.
We haven't got any
So-
more to do.
So we got a motion on the floor in a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. So we are 7 minutes before their meeting.
Yeah, one no.
You said
One no, I'm sorry, Mr. Dillon. We're 7 minutes before the meeting. At this point, with everyone's agreement, we'll go ahead and continue for our next meeting, the items that we're unable to cover because of the special call meeting. And we will have Ms. Hayes send out some proposed dates again to see if we can get the maximum number of people in place, because it seems to be working well to do it that way.
Good.
Is that okay?
Yes.
There a motion
Motion
to
to adjourn.
adjourn at this time?
Motion.
Second then.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. You come over there.
You cut us off.
Come over me.
I'm coming over there. Yeah.
Pre-terminal.
I'm just taking normal with me.
Or just an hour long.
An hour worked well.
But we only got one thing done.
Well, that's.